All right. So, time to give another little update from my adventures reading hands at Mind, Body, Spirit markets and fairs. So, this month I was in Hamilton. It's a town in the middle of the North Island of New Zealand. And not so many readings this weekend. I only did 11 altogether, seven on the Saturday, four on the Sunday. But as always, there's always interesting hands to encounter and interesting people to meet and interesting stories to be told. So I just thought I would share some of those with you this time. And it always amazes me what kind of interesting hand features you get as well. So I'm going to show you some of the interesting and more unusual things that I found on this weekend. And some of the things, of course, we don't know what they're about, but then nevertheless, the questions can be raised, curiosity can be had, and if we had more time, perhaps we could take it a little bit further. But most of these readings were 15 minutes or maybe 30 minutes. So it's not really enough time to kind of really explore something as complicated as that. And of course, the space in a kind of market space or in a hall like that, where there's lots of other readers, isn't really conducive to kind of that quiet kind of investigation. And so sometimes you need more time, and sometimes you need a bit more privacy than that as well. But and so that's again another challenge when you're reading hands in those kind of spaces. You are dealing with the intimacies of people's lives, and you are really focusing on some things which can be quite painful for them to realize, or some traumatic things if you're touching on those things. So it's quite a difficult space to navigate because you don't necessarily have the kind of privacy that you would really want to look at some of those things. So some of the things you have to skirt over a little bit superficially, but that doesn't mean that they can't be helpful or can't be useful for people. And there were a couple of examples on this weekend where there were some trauma spots hit, examined. Um, and it's always important to proceed carefully when you see those kind of things in the hand. So let's have a look at some hands and see what we came up with this time. Um, oh, there's me. So that's me in my stall. Um, yeah, really simple stall, really. I don't have a lot going on with it. Just a sign-up sheet and a few posters and things. And obviously promoting my book at the moment, so that takes pride of place. But it's quite nice because that emphasizes I'm looking at the fingerprints, and that is what I mainly look at in these spaces. I look at the fingerprint patterns of the hand. They're easy to see by and large, although there was actually one one hand I couldn't actually see the fingerprint at all. I think I just about worked out the fingerprint on the index finger, but all the other fingerprint patterns were so faint. She was an older woman. Sometimes they are difficult to see, of course, but in general, fingerprints are much easier to look at, and along with the hand shape and the skin texture. And that's kind of those are things I always notice in the hand is those three things. Then I look at the thumbs, see how bendy or strong or long the thumbs are. Look for the fingers, see if any fingers are longer or shorter. Look to see if any fingers are bent. So look to see if there's leaning fingers. So look at the deviations in the positioning of the fingers is also important. And then of course sometimes the lines of the hand stand out as well. So and that's the first example I've got here for you in this hand I looked at. I've got two handprints of this one. The second one's slightly better, actually. You can see that a bit better. No idea what this is about. I didn't really have time to explore it with her, but can you notice here in this hand, there are two major earth lines. One going here, like that, and one going all the way down there, like that. Really unusual to see a hand with two earth lines or two lifelines. Um, I, as I said, I didn't have, this was a 15-minute reading, so I didn't have time to explore this in great detail with her. Once you've gone through the handshake fingerprints and done those most important things, so she had a water skin texture. She's got a very long fire finger with a whirl on it. So a lot of the conversation was about her aesthetic sensibilities and how she needs to be in beautiful spaces, how she's artistic and creative in those kind of ways. Classic combination. You've got a skin texture that wants to be in beautiful places, then you've got a whirl on a long ring finger that wants to create beautiful spaces in a highly original way. So I did ask if she had an identical twin. That was a no. So that's the only time I've ever seen a doubled line like that is in the hands of identical twins, where you get the major earth line running the full length of the hand in two distinct lines. I suggested that she might want to go into look into family constellation therapy. There's a technique within that where they can identify whether or not you've had a lost twin. Sometimes there are two eggs that get fertilized in the womb at the same time, but rather than them developing into two humans, one of those eggs gets kind of macrophaged into the other and unified with the other. So it kind of like get two DNA strands going in to one human being. So that kind of creates that kind of sense of duality within that. So I asked her to look into that. I mean, and I told her to get back to me. So maybe we'll find that out whether she has that experience or not. But yeah, it is an interesting thing. It's called the lost twin within family constellation therapy. If you've not heard of that before, it's definitely something worth checking out. So I don't know, no idea what that means, but there you go. That sometimes you get these really weird anomalies like that. While we're talking about a hand with a long firefinger, the first hand reading I did was kind of pretty classic. Again, a woman with a long firefinger with a whirl on it, whirl on a thumb, whirl on a firefinger, whirl on a passive hand index finger, air skin texture. And I was going on about how artistic and creative she was, and she didn't really give very much away. And I told her how good she was at communication, and she had a loop of serious intent. So I said she was very career-minded. Anyway, it turns out that she was an art teacher. She was a school teacher, and she taught arts and creative studies at school, which I thought was particularly apposite. Anyway, that's kind of classic formation that you get in the hand of a teacher is a long ring finger with a whirl on it. So in a teacher with a so the teacher would normally a long index finger, maybe with a whirl on it, but a long ring finger with a whirl on it is classic formation for an artist or an art person, someone doing artwork, and she happens to be doing that in the context of a school. And then yes, by contrast, the next hand reading was with a woman who had four whirls on her thumbs and index fingers, and a long water finger, and she's basically an admin, worked in an office as an administrator, was sort of head of admin in the office that she worked in, which is much more classic long as a long water finger thing. But this the art school teacher, she was actually the head of arts in the school, so she was clearly very artistically inclined. Um, so the next guy, well, they only had one guy in the whole weekend, actually. So that's 11 hand readings, 10 women, one guy. He was interesting because he came to, I give a talk in the morning as well. I usually give a talk each weekend as well, and had about 20 people turn up to the talk. It gives me a chance to explain hand reading, what it's about. And he came to the talk as with his wife and his children, and we were talking about the water line, and he kind of said, "Oh, what's my water line? It's a bit different." And of course, he's got a simian line. So let's have a look at that there. So there you go. There's the simian line formation. You can see it quite clearly. He, instead of having two distinct lines across the hand, he's got one line formation going across there like that, bonding the two together. There's actually a little bit of a vestige of an airline going down there, and there's actually a secondary waterline formation sort of floating up here, but not actually connected to it at all. So the simian line is the kind of the key thing. And this is an Earth hand shape. It's probably a little bit difficult to see that from the, the photo. It's a little bit distorted, I guess. But it's a really big, he was a really big bloke with really big hands. Um, South African, unsurprisingly, of course, the South Africans are often big, strong people. Earth hand shape, fire skin texture, simian line in his active hand, 10 loops. So, in lots of ways, quite sociable and gregarious, but primarily orientated towards making money and being and working with his hands in some kind of way. Currently working a refrigeration business, which of course is kind of like a classic earth fire combination. Obviously, I talked a lot about his simian line, and that was the kind of a big part of the conversation about how he held his emotions in, how he was totally focused on his work. His wife was sort of eavesdropping, and she was sort of nodding as I was explaining all of this about the difficulties he had with his emotional expression. But yeah, that was all quite challenging. But what he did do, he also did, he loves dogs. And that sort of came out because I explored this with him. This is the animal affinity loop or animal affinity triradius, as Beryl Hutchinson calls it. And I'm having a bit of a discussion with one of my students at the moment, who is going to do a research project on this because I came across this pattern. Originally, it talks about in Beryl Hutchinson's book, Your Life in Your Hands. So I came across this pattern in probably the late 1980s, something like that. And I was quite dismissive of it because, well, I didn't say make any sense to me why this pattern should have anything to do with animals. And Beryl Hutchinson's pretty reliable for her poem of dermatoglyphics, so I didn't want to dismiss it. But I didn't have any experience of it. And at that time, I was living in a university town, studying in university libraries, in a non-rural space, and I never came across it. Um, what it is, if you look at it, you can see that the triradius underneath the ring finger actually does makes a little Y formation like that, and doesn't this ridge here doesn't actually go anywhere. What's happened is that the ridges from the D triradius, the air finger triradius, they come around here like that. So that's the triradius there. And then the B triradius, which is there. So that comes around there and they basically enclose the uh, the triradius underneath the ring finger. So all these ridges basically follow around like that, and so there's no way that the ridges from the triradius can get out. So they're kind of trapped inside this uh, map of ridges underneath the ring finger. And so now my student who lives in a rural part of New Zealand, she's found dozens of these. And I think she's got a collection of about 19, and 18 of whom are all involved with animals or have lots of pets or have livestock or love their dogs or run a cattery or a vets and things like that. So they're very animals are really, really big part of their life. And so I've invited her to kind of do a research project on that and kind of try and work out what's going on here because it's something that has escaped my attention. Anyway, we were just talking about this the day before, and there we are on the next hand reading session I'm going to at a Mind Body Spirit Fair. There it is. There's an example of a guy, and he said he loves his dogs, and his wife was nodding like he loved his dogs more than he loved his family. And there seems to be some really natural affinity with animals when people have this pattern, like they can communicate with them. They're closer to them than they are to human beings, and that was the case with this particular guy. So I was kind of like, okay, all right, I'm going to have to do some more research on this myself. So it's something, as I said, that's escaped my attention during my researches in the 1990s, just from lack of experience, really. It's like I didn't doubt Beryl Hutchinson, but I couldn't teach it, and I haven't taught it, and it's not even in my book because I had no verification of it. But apparently, I was just living in the wrong part of the world or in the wrong town. So more on that to come at the next International Handreading Conference. I think that's going to be coming up in April, 2026. So we'll see then. All right. So what's the next handprint we got? Oh, this is an interesting one. Okay. Okay. So this is a woman with 8 whorls. Yeah. You can see the whorls on both thumbs. Yeah. Every digit except the middle finger. So that's an unusual distribution of whorls and an unusual number of whorls as well. So clearly the conversation with this lady was all about whorls, independence and autonomy. She's a very keen gardener and she does pottery. She works in the Hamilton Gardens as a volunteer. So quite an eclectic sort of lifestyle and wants a lot of freedom for herself. We talked about the loop of charisma as well, the loop of leadership. And that's not something that's active in her at the moment. She has rather kind of yeah, sort of doesn't have an elevated view of herself. I think that's a better way of putting it. And I kind of wonder when I see those kind of things, when I kind of see this kind of formation here with the separation of the air and the earth line, I always wonder how a person's life would have been different had they got more support from their family during childhood. It's always an indication to me of a lack of close ties between the individual and the family during childhood. And on that particular note, and this is not her hand here, but there was another woman who came on that day as well, who had a radial loop on index finger, and very, very short low set air fingers. And this is about so this is the sort of signs of things in the hand that are typical expressions of people who've had difficult childhoods. Radial loop on the index finger is really common in the hands of women who've got domineering, critical, overbearing, bitchy mothers who are always too kind of critical of their children. So if you see a radial loop in the hand of a woman, ask about her relationship with her mother, particularly if that radial loop's on the passive hand. Um, and in a case where you've got short low set air fingers, you can pretty much guarantee that there's been a problem in the marital relationship of her parents. Um, so yeah, in this particular case of this woman, her parents separated at age 4 and her dad died at age 8. And it's the low set air finger is extraordinary how many times it's around the age of 7 or 8 that there's a very big traumatic experience for a young woman in relationship to her father. The father is absent, the father leaves home, the parents separate, the father's sent to jail, or as in this case, the father dies. So when you see a short low set air finger in a woman's hand, again, proceed gently, but ask a question about that relationship of that child to her father and what was going on in their family life around the age of 7 or 8. And it usually points to some kind of separation that's happened between the family and the father, leaving the little girl sort of abandoned and alone. All right, so, oh, yeah, oh, this is an interesting one. Okay, this is a really interesting hand. Um, all right, so this is a Maori woman, and she's got 5 double loops. Like, really, 5 double loops? And not only got 5 double loops, she's also got 2 damaged fingers. You can see the ring finger was cut off. She had that cut off when she was a 2-year-old. About she had an accident with a saw, a band saw, and then the little finger on it was also damaged on another occasion as well. So this is a case of a short low set air finger, which is not to do with a short low set air finger. This is to do with an injury. So if you've got an injured finger, then don't start talking about short low set air fingers in a psychological sense, because it doesn't mean that. Although I think you could probably say if she injured her hand twice on a bandsaw, once at the age of 2 and once at the age of 8, there's a bit of parental neglect going on there. What on earth is a 2-year-old doing anywhere near a bandsaw to get her finger cut off? Um, yeah, so you don't often see damaged fingers like that. And then we spent most of the time talking about the double loops. Obviously, the double loop motif is going to be incredibly important to her in her life. Confusion, uncertainty, vacillation, uh, trying to get some kind of reconciliation and mediation between different opposites that she's experiencing in her life. And particularly, I think when you got that many double loops, it's often an indication of someone's a very strong spiritual orientation to life. And I was explaining all of this, and she basically then said she started, she now works and does body work and healing, and she does something called flinchlock contact care, and that's kind of like a really big part of the work that she does now, and she sees that much very much as a spiritual thing. And as we were talking about that, she said, "Oh, and by the way, you read my hands about 3 years ago." And you just told me all the same things as you told me last time. And I said, oh, well, glad to hear that. And she said, I was just wanted to check, that you were still going to say all the same things. So she came in for a sort of second reading, and I don't remember what I said the first time round. But it's interesting. I do remember the hand, and I've probably got that hand somewhere in my collection somewhere. If I can find that, that will be an interesting thing to see. But it's like it was a few years ago. All right, and I just found it. So there you go, same hand. You can see a very distinctive formation of the ring finger. So I took this on the 11th of December 2023. So she did come for hand reading 2 years before. So that was kind of interesting. I mean, I think that's also kind of a reflection of someone with a double loop or lots of double loops, a little bit unsure, wanting reassurance. going over it again just to make double sure. So that's kind of interesting that she had already come for a hand reading. Um, but yeah, and I kind of remembered it. I mean, it's a very distinctive, uh, disfiguration of the hand, of course, with a little ring finger like that. So yeah, you do get these anomalous things sometimes. So they're kind of interesting to look at. That's one I took this weekend. So all right. Yeah, but there's no significance to it. I mean, don't start in trying to interpret these things. I mean, that would be, I think, it would be a foolish thing to do. If you think about the way that people sometimes, when they've had the limb amputated, they often say they've got like they still feel like they have their limb there, despite the fact that the finger's missing physically. The energetic imprint of that finger is probably still there as well. So yeah, it's not something to be considered chirologically anyway. It's an accident. It happened. And obviously, we can't read the fingerprint on it, and we can't tell anything about the fire finger because the fire finger isn't there. It's as simple as that, really. And we shouldn't make anything more of it than that. All right. Oh, there you go. Here's another good example of some fingers, stuff going on with fingers, leaning fingers. I hope you can all see that. These fingers are not sitting straight on this hand. The fingers should be aligned vertically on the palm so that when they're sitting on the palm, they sit right in the middle of the hand like that. And as you can see here, these fingers are leaning that way. It's not an uncommon thing to find in hands of young people these days. It basically shows a kind of a dopamine addiction, a looking outward towards external factors for validation, approbation, stimulation. It shows a kind of consciousness that's taken away from centered groundingness within oneself and leaning out towards um, an external source for validation or reinforcement or psychological support. It's probably the most important indicator of kind of a codependent mentality. Women with leaning fingers like this often had fall into codependency in their relationships, and she also had hyperflexive and double jointed thumbs as well. So hyperflexive means the top joint of the thumb was really bendy, and double jointed means that this joint is what I call wibbly wobbly or sort of disconnected. So there's a lot of passivity in this person's life, a lot of psychological dependency. Even the way the thumb is held, you can see that the thumb is held really close to the hand as well. So a closely positioned thumb like that, there's quite a natural kind of reticence and in the way she's handling herself and manifesting herself, which is to say, not at all. She's people with wibbly wobbly, bendy thumbs like this are kind of have a very magical worldview. Oh, it's all going to work out. God works in mysterious ways. The universe will provide. These are people who are kind of quite happy to abdicate responsibility for the navigation of their own life and believe in the serendipitous forces of magic to decide their life for them. Fantastic if you're traveling through India and you've got all the time in the world and no financial worries and you feel safe. Not very good for planning your life and directing your life in any particular kind of direction that you want to go in. So yeah, so leaning fingers, read, look out for leaning fingers. If you see leaning fingers, as I say, the fingers should align straight. You just got to make sure that you've got the wrist straight, your hand straight. The middle finger should be in along here like that. So you can see that all these fingers are kind of pushing over that way like that. So it needs to be not just the index finger. It needs, I mean, even more so in the left hand. I think you can see that they're all leaning over that one. The only finger that's okay in this hand, in the right hand, is the air finger. All the others are leaning. The leaning fingers needs to be at least three of the fingers and off kilter like this and essentially what you've got there is if you think about the earth finger as being a symbol of how stable somebody is, if the thing that causes your stability is leaning over, then you're not stable. So the psychological instability comes from that. All right, what's going on in this one here? Oh, okay, this is what have we got here? We've got a Sydney line, haven't we? Yes. Oh, better stop calling it the Sydney line. Um, What is the Sydney line? The Sydney line is the airline that cuts right across the hand. And as you can see in this hand, one on her left hand, she's got a relatively normal airline going here, and then on the right hand, it goes all the way across the palm like that. Sydney lines or transverse airlines that cut right across the palm do exactly that. They cut the hand in two. And cutting the hand in two, basically what they do is they divorce mind and body and often make people out of touch with their emotions, and make it very easy for them to be kind of unaware of what's going on inside them internally. How do we know that's going to be true for this woman? Well, look at the waterline as well. You've got a very strongly reduplicated waterline there. So you've got a persona line in the major waterline as well. And this woman used to be in the army. So a Maori woman, obviously relatively unusual for women to be in the army. And clearly, if you're going to be in the army, one of the things you want to be able to do is not feel anything, not feel the pain of the training, not feel the arduousness of the task ahead, be able to sort of put a lid on your sensitivity. And having a Sydney line, of course, will give the ability to do that in a sense of cutting yourself off from your own feeling state. What was interesting with this woman is she's got lots of whirls, 8 whirls on the fingers, and the only loops are on the thumbs, stiff thumbs, of course. And I kind of was talking to her about how does she cope with being in the army with all those whirls. But she basically, yeah, that was kind of, she was okay with being in the army. She was okay with following the orders like that. And I noticed particularly, of course, that she's got a very bent ring finger. And the reason why she was comfortable being in the army was because she grew up in the army in the sense that her dad was in the army. So she was always living on army bases as a child and moving around and was basically had the army ethos all around her when she was growing up. And here's a very strong sense of duty and obligation, a strong sense of kind of dedication that she's going to have with that. And then she's got really stiff thumbs as well. So you've got obsessive thinking, like someone very goal orientated who can stick to the goal at hand and what they're doing, irrespective of how they feel about it, can cut off their emotions, can separate their internal feeling state. They can put a brave face on themselves and hide their inner feelings. Highly motivated and independent, very, very determined and going to push through, and a great sense of duty and obligation. So, like how does a woman succeed in the army? Well, those factors might be something that would contribute to that. Oh, and 2 loops of seriousness, just to make, just for good measure as well. Of course, you can see the 2 loops of seriousness between the earth and ring fingers, earth and fire fingers there. So, career-minded, having a position of authority and responsibility, doing something worthwhile, making a contribution to society in some kind of way, all important factors for someone with a loop of seriousness. And of course, being in the army, do that and make her father happy at the same time. So nothing particularly problematic about the air finger, I don't think, in this particular case. But yeah, the fire finger bent to the earth finger, I think, is a kind of key, uh, is a key indicator of what's motivating her in this case. And as if by complete contrast, the next person was a woman with a water hand. And as rare as it is for women to be in the army, is more rare still perhaps in people with water hand shapes. Absolutely stonkingly long fingers. The perspective on the handprint probably is distorting that a little bit. That was how I was looking at it from the camera. But either way, you can see that the best way to detect whether or not it's a water hand, of course, is the length of the earth finger in relationship to the width of the palm. So you basically will find in a water hand shape, it's a long oblong palm. Obviously, you got a long oblong palm if it's a water hand shape. But the key thing is it's quite a thin palm. So the middle finger will be longer than the width of the palm. And that was absolutely the case here. And she was an interesting case where she had a young, relatively young child, about a 2-year-old with her. uh, water hand shape, air skin texture, radial loop on the water finger, 8 loops and 2 loops of good humor. So when you get a hand shape that isn't a fire handshake, that's probably the time that you spend most of the time actually talking about the handshake, because it's so unusual to see an elemental handshake that isn't earth, it isn't fire or fire earth in New Zealand. We get a lot of those in New Zealand. It's really important to talk about it because the handshake, if you have a handshake that's different from the normative handshake of your culture, you very much feel like you're a fish out of water. You don't feel like you fit in. So it's kind of important to articulate that for people so that they can see that it's uh, important to them to understand why they feel different, why they feel like they don't fit in, and understand that to get them to understand their energetic dynamic is very different from the prevailing cultural norms that they where they find themselves. So yeah, we spent most of the time talking about that, and of course, you know, she's really into spiritual things. Of course, psychic things, spiritual things. She's a Reiki healer. Runs a yoga studio, so she does yoga and Reiki and healing and massage and all that kind of sensitive stuff, as you might expect. Also, from having a radial loop on her water hand as well, and doing what she loves. So, and her challenges, of course, are going to be in relationships to people in the culture of New Zealand, um, because of her hand shape. So, dominant hand shape in New Zealand is fire earth hand shape. All right, so there you go. That's a water hand. Don't see those very often. So look and check the length of the earth finger in relationship to the width of the palm. That'll tell you whether it's a water hand shape. And well, this one's much more of an earthy handshake, I think you can say. You can see it's a podgy little hand. Um, this is the one I had real difficulty seeing the fingerprint patterns on. Um, I don't quite know why it was so hard, but I could work out she had a radial loop on the index finger. Um, Water skin texture. Well, water skin texture always makes it more difficult to see the fingerprint patterns because they're much closer together. Long water finger with a radial loop on it, and but the water finger's bent to the earth finger. So what does that mean? When the water finger's bent to the earth finger, it's got a radial loop. Oh, remember what we said earlier on? Radial loop on the water finger of a woman, probably got a critical mother. And if it's bent as well, what does that indicate? Well, that usually indicates an extremely critical or perhaps even authoritarian parent, because what's happened here is the bending of the water finger indicates that there was a childhood experience of fear. It's like the water finger's bent to the earth finger, so it's bent towards the finger of authority. So there's usually an over authoritarian parent in the childhood and likely to be the mother in the case of this woman because of the radial loop. You don't know, so you just ask, how was your relationship with your mother? And then you invite the conversation about that and explore the difficulties that she had with that. However, I suspect there was also a problem with the father. Why? Because we have a very short, like I said, air finger. So here we go, boom, air fingers very low set. The fingers, the photograph doesn't really do that justice particularly, but you can see that's a diminutive little low set air finger, and it's true on both hands as well. So, um, yeah, another factor that shows some difficulties in childhood to do with the relationship with the father and the absence of the father during childhood. So, um, remember, it's important to note that what the hand shows isn't trauma. The hand does not show trauma, and trauma isn't an event of any kind. What trauma is the response to what's happened to us. So when you see these patterns in the hand, you're seeing kind of developmental responses, the lack of communication, the lack of self-worth indicated by the short, low set air finger, the inability to articulate one's needs, the bending of the index finger that shows uh, a response to an over-authoritarian, overbearing parent. So these are like physical responses within the body that are kind of telling us and pointing to something that happened in childhood, something to do with the parents, something to do with absent father, something to do with an authoritarian parent. We never actually know. People respond to traumatic events in different ways. But when we see these patterns and we see a combination of them, it's really a good idea to sort of start thinking in those terms and at least ask the questions. To ask the questions about those kind of things can invite a conversation about those things, and inviting a conversation can be incredibly helpful and healing for people if it's the first time that those things have been discussed by them or pointed out to them. It can feel like a validation for what they know to be true in their experience. Remember, what we're looking at in the hand is people's apprehension of their experience, at the apprehension of the phenomena of life that we call experience. The hand is an internal thing. It's not saying events or things that happened out there, whether it's marriage or babies or travel or childhood abuse. It doesn't matter what the out there thing is at all. What we're looking at is the internalization of that and the internalization processes that have gone on within the person, maybe in response to things that are out there, but it's a reflection of the perceptual processes of that individual. So what we're looking at really is how the person themselves see those experiences and the impact that it's had upon them. And if there is an impact of those things, and those things will still be having an impact on them, even if those events happened many, many decades earlier. All right. So tread lightly if you see those kind of things in the hand. It is important that they are recognized, but it's also really important that they're handled very carefully and very gently. And sometimes it might be best just to say to them, look, if you want to explore that further, then maybe we should do a more detailed follow-up hand reading together. So have your business card ready and hand that out. All right, so that's my collection of handprints that I've got to share with you this time from this month. I'll be off to festivals during January, and I'll come back with some more tales from the front line of hand reading in the new year. Um, in the meantime, like and subscribe on my channel here, please. If you've been watching these videos, basically subscribe and you'll get notifications when the new ones come out. And if you're seriously interested in looking at hand reading, go to patreon.com/hand reading and have a look at what's on offer there. That's where I do my teaching. So if you want to learn about how to read hands and learn how to do this kind of assessment of the handprints or hand features, then come and check me out at Patreon and come and do some courses. You might learn something. And don't forget, my book is coming out in January. So my new book is going to be out available from January the 27th. It's going to be available from January the 27th, 2026, and it's available at amazon.com, amazon.co.uk, and online and in good retail stores all around the world. So yeah, it's coming out. It's a comprehensive look at the fingerprint patterns of your hand and will form the basis of your knowledge of how to interpret the fingerprint patterns when you come across them in the hand. So look out for the palmistry fingerprints, and I'll see you next time.